Bruce Springsteen was 45 seconds into Born to Run, the song that had made him famous. The song that 85,000 people had come to the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum specifically to hear. When a man in the front row dropped to the ground and didn't get up. What Springsteen did in the next 8 minutes had never been done before at a concert that size. And the people who were there that night have spent the decades since trying to find words for what they witnessed. It was September 30th, 1985. Springsteen was midway through the Born in the USA tour, the biggest tour of his career and one of the largest concert tours in the history of rock and roll. The Los Angeles stop was the culmination of a 10-show run at the Coliseum that had broken every attendance record the venue had ever set. The crowd that night was 85,000 people. The stage was the size of a city block. The production involved 17 trucks of equipment and a crew of over 200 people. None of that mattered at 10:47 p.m. when a man named Gerald Watkins fell. Gerald was 53 years old. He had served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 1st Cavalry Division, arriving in-country in 1966 and rotating home in 1968 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and a collection of injuries both visible and invisible that he had spent the better part of 2 decades learning to live alongside. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at a school district in Inglewood. He had a daughter named Patricia, who was 22 and lived in Pasadena. He had been divorced for 6 years. He lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on Manchester Avenue, and on most evenings, he ate dinner in front of the television and went to bed before 10. He had not been to a concert since 1971. His co-worker, Ray Gutierrez, had given him the ticket 3 weeks earlier, almost as a joke. Ray was 28, a Springsteen obsessive who had somehow obtained 2 front-row tickets through a connection he was never fully willing to explain. His girlfriend had backed out at the last minute. He had looked around the break room and offered the ticket to Gerald, who was eating a sandwich and reading a paperback. And Gerald had said, "Sure, why not?" in the tone of a man agreeing to something he expects to forget about before it actually happens. He did not forget. He drove to the Coliseum in his 1979 Buick and stood in the front row and watched Bruce Springsteen perform for 2.5 hours. He had not known what to expect. He was not a particular Springsteen fan. He knew the songs the way everyone knew the songs, from the radio, from the background of other people's lives. But standing there in the front row with the sound hitting him at that volume and the crowd pressing in from all sides, something started happening to Gerald Watkins that he did not have a framework for. It started during Born in the USA. Gerald knew the song. Everyone knew the song. It was everywhere that year, inescapable. The soundtrack to something large and complicated that the country was trying to work out about itself. But hearing it live, at that volume, in that crowd, was different from hearing it on the radio. The radio version was background. This version was something you stood inside of. And the words Gerald had always half-registered without fully absorbing, were suddenly very loud and very specific, and very much about something he recognized. He had not talked about Vietnam in years. Not to his daughter, not to his co-worker Ray, not to the therapist he had seen briefly in 1979, and stopped seeing because it felt like describing a fire to someone who had never felt heat. He had learned to carry it the way you carry something heavy when you have been carrying it long enough, not comfortably, but efficiently. with the minimum expenditure of attention required to keep it from dropping. Standing in the front row of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum on the night of September 30th, 1985, listening to Born in the USA at a volume that he could feel in his sternum, Gerald Watkins felt the weight of what he was carrying shift in a way it had not shifted in a very long time. By the time Springsteen moved into Born to Run, Gerald was not entirely sure where he was. Not in the dissociative way, not in the way that had sometimes happened in the years immediately after he came home, when a car backfiring could take him somewhere else entirely. It was gentler than that, and more total. He was present in his body and present in the crowd, and at the same time, he was somewhere he could not have named. Some interior space that the music had opened up without asking permission. The opening chords of Born to Run hit the crowd like a physical event. 85,000 people surged forward simultaneously. Gerald surged with them, and then something happened in his chest. A tightening, a pressure, a sensation that he would describe later as a door closing very fast. And his knees went, and he went down. He did not lose consciousness. He was aware of the ground against his cheek, of feet around him, of the music continuing overhead. He heard someone shout. He felt hands on his shoulders. Then the music stopped. Not faded, not slowed. Stopped. The silence that replaced it was so sudden and so complete that 85,000 people seemed to inhale at once. Springsteen had seen Gerald go down from the stage. He had been watching the front row. He always watched the front row. It was where the faces were close enough to read. And he had seen the man drop in real time. He had cut his hand across his throat in the signal that every musician knows, the one that means stop everything now, and the E Street Band had stopped. He was at the edge of the stage before the last note had finished echoing. "Stop," he said into the microphone quietly, more to himself than to the crowd. Then louder. "Hold on, everybody hold on." He jumped down from the stage. It was a 6-foot drop to the security barrier and another few feet to the floor, and Springsteen made it without hesitation, without asking anyone, without waiting for security to clear a path. The crowd in the front row parted. Springsteen pushed through to where Gerald was lying, where 2 security guards were already crouched down, and he got on his knees on the concrete floor of the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum in front of 85,000 people and put his hand on Gerald Watkins' shoulder. "Hey," he said. "Stay with me. Look at me." Gerald looked at him. He said later that the first thing he thought, in a distant and slightly absurd way, was that Bruce Springsteen was shorter than he expected. "You with me?" Springsteen asked. "Yeah," Gerald said. "I think so." "Good. Don't move. Just stay down." Medical staff reached them within 2 minutes. Gerald had not had a heart attack. It was a vasovagal episode, a sudden drop in heart rate and blood pressure triggered by the combination of heat, crowd pressure, and emotional intensity. The kind of thing that looks alarming and resolves quickly and leaves the person who experienced it embarrassed and exhausted and slightly outside themselves. The paramedics checked his vitals, gave him water, helped him sit up. Springsteen did not go back to the stage. He stayed on the floor next to Gerald while the paramedics worked, one hand on the man's arm, talking to him in a low voice that the microphones couldn't pick up. The crowd, 85,000 people, stood completely silent. Some of them had lighters in the air. Nobody was moving. After the paramedics cleared Gerald and helped him to his feet, Springsteen stood up with him. Gerald was unsteady. Springsteen put an arm around his shoulders. "What's your name?" Springsteen asked. "Gerald. Gerald Watkins." "Gerald." Springsteen looked at him. "Were you in the service?" Gerald looked at him. He hadn't said anything about Vietnam. He hadn't said anything at all. "The tattoo," Springsteen said, nodding toward Gerald's forearm, where the 1st Cavalry patch was inked in faded blue and black. "First Cav?" 66 to 68, Gerald said. Springsteen nodded. He didn't say anything for a moment. The crowd was still silent. 85,000 people holding their breath around two men having a conversation on a concrete floor. Then Springsteen said, "Thank you for your service. I mean that." Gerald said nothing. His throat had closed. "You want to sit down for a while, or you want to come back up?" Springsteen asked. Gerald looked at the stage. Then he looked at Springsteen. Then he said something that surprised everyone who heard it, including himself. "I want to hear the rest of the show," he said. Springsteen helped Gerald to a seat on the side of the stage where he could see everything and where the security team could keep an eye on him. Then he climbed back up, walked to the microphone, and looked out at 85,000 people who had been silent for 11 minutes. "I want to tell you something," Springsteen said. "That man's name is Gerald Watkins. He served 2 tours in Vietnam. He's going to be okay." He paused. "And I think he deserves a hand." 85,000 people made a sound that Gerald Watkins would carry inside him for the rest of his life. Springsteen dedicated the rest of the show to Gerald. Not with announcements, just with the particular quality of attention he brought to every song from that point forward. The way a performer dedicates something not by saying so, but by meaning it differently than he meant it before. After the show, Gerald was brought backstage. Springsteen spent 40 minutes with him. They talked about Vietnam, about Los Angeles, about Gerald's daughter Patricia, about the school district in Inglewood. Springsteen asked questions and listened to the answers. Gerald, who had not talked about any of this in years, found that the words came out more easily than he expected. The way words come out when someone is actually listening rather than waiting for you to finish so they can say something else. Before Gerald left, Springsteen gave him 2 things. The first was a photograph, signed. The second was a phone number. Not his personal number, but the number of a veterans outreach organization in Los Angeles that Springsteen had been quietly supporting for 2 years, run by a Vietnam veteran named Tom Hannigan, who had built it specifically for men like Gerald, men who had come home and learned to carry things efficiently rather than putting them down. Gerald called the number 3 days later. He started attending the group the following week. He went every week for the next 9 years. Patricia Watkins learned about what had happened at the concert from her father, who told her the following Sunday when she came over for dinner. She had noticed something different about him when she walked in the door. Something in the way he was sitting, the way he looked at her when she came in. Something that she could not have named precisely, but that she recognized as an absence of something that had always been there before. A weight that was no longer where it had been. She asked him what happened. He told her. When he got to the part about the veterans group, she started to cry. He had not seen her cry in years. He reached across the table and put his hand on hers and said, "I'm going to be all right." She said she knew. She had always known he would be. She had just been waiting. Gerald Watkins attended Springsteen concerts 6 more times over the following decades, always in the front row when he could manage it, always with his daughter Patricia next to him. He never collapsed again. He never spoke to Springsteen again directly, though he wrote a letter in 1992 that he never sent, because by the time he finished writing it, he understood that what he had needed to say was already contained in the fact of his life continuing the way it had continued, and that Springsteen would have understood that without being told. Gerald passed away in 2018 at the age of 86, in the same one-bedroom apartment on Manchester Avenue where he had lived for 31 years. Patricia was with him. She said that in his final weeks, he had been calm in a way he had not always been calm, that whatever he had been carrying for so long, he seemed at the end to have finally set down. On the wall above his bed, there were 2 things: the signed photograph from 1985 and a 1st Cavalry patch, framed, that his daughter had given him one Christmas, mounted next to a small printed card that read, "I want to hear the rest of the show." Those were the words Gerald had said on the floor of the Coliseum when Springsteen asked him if he wanted to sit down or come back up. Patricia keeps the photograph and the patch now, in her house in Pasadena. She has never sold them, never loaned them to anyone, never posted them on the internet. She keeps them because they are the record of a night when her father decided to stay, and because the man who made that possible jumped off a stage in front of 85,000 people to kneel on a concrete floor next to a stranger and say, "Look at me. Stay with me. You're not alone." There is something about that night that the people who were there have never fully been able to explain. It is not the moment Springsteen jumped off the stage. It is not the 11 minutes of silence from 85,000 people, though that was the kind of silence that changes the air in a place. It is the question Springsteen asked when he reached Gerald's side. Not, "Are you hurt?" Not, "Can you hear me?" He asked, "You with me?" 2 words that meant something more than their medical utility. 2 words that Gerald Watkins would think about for years afterward, late at night in the apartment on Manchester Avenue with the television off and the city making its ordinary sounds outside. Gerald had come home from Vietnam in 1968 to a country that was not entirely sure what to do with him. He had learned to be self-sufficient in the way people learn self-sufficiency when the alternative feels too uncertain. He had learned to need very little from others. Springsteen was there anyway, on the floor of a stadium, on his knees, asking 2 words that meant, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere. You are not doing this alone." That was what the Veterans Group gave Gerald too, across 9 years of Tuesday evenings. Not answers, not solutions. Just the irreplaceable knowledge that he was not the only one carrying what he carried. Patricia Watkins has never sought out Springsteen to thank him. She has thought about it. She has drafted the letter in her head on long drives and in the quiet after her own daughters are in bed. But every time she gets close, she thinks about what her father said in that session. That a man had handed him a number and he had used it. And she decides that maybe the right way to honor what happened on that floor is not with a letter, but with the fact of everything that came after. The 9 years of Tuesdays, the Sunday dinners, the way Gerald looked at her when she walked through his door in his final weeks, with the weight finally, visibly set down. "You with me?" Springsteen had asked on the floor of the Coliseum. Yes, Patricia thinks. We were, all the way to the end. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. Share this with a veteran in your life, or with anyone who needs to be reminded that asking for help is not weakness. It is the bravest thing a person can do. Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone stopped everything for a stranger? Tell us in the comments. And don't forget to ring the notification bell for more stories about the human moments behind music's greatest legends.